So I thought I'd introduce GS1 first because a lot of people won't know who GS1 are. We are an international standards organisation. We work across 116 countries, or have organisations in 116 countries. We're a federated model, so we have autonomy within countries, if that makes sense. We're owned by our members, so the members of GS1 Ireland own GS1 Ireland. And we have about 3,500 members at the moment. So GS1 started back under a different name back in the early 70s, 1971, I think. And 1974 was the first time a barcode was scanned in a supermarket in Ohio. It was a packet of juicy fruit, if you want to know. And that's now in the Smithsonian Institute as a record of that. So it started off with barcodes, retailers getting together saying we need a better way of doing point of sale, so let's come up with a way of scanning, and they adopted the barcode, and it grew from that then. So we have standards for barcodes, we then have standards for sharing data, we have standards for traceability, we have standards for how you put tags on items, and then GS1 invented, if you like, the RFID standard and donated that to ISO, as we've done with several standards that we developed. So our purpose, first of all, we're neutral and not-for-profit. So we're also user-driven and governed. So the standards, Geraldine talked about how standards are developed, and GS1 standards are developed from the ground up. So it's a member of GS1 coming to us and saying, we need a standard for something that doesn't already exist, or we need you to modify an existing standard. And we're starting to see that now in construction, where some of the standards we have don't exactly fit the construction model. So we're starting to look at developing those. So we're global and local. So we're, as I mentioned, we have that local autonomy, but we're a global organisation, so it's a global standard. So there isn't a way of implementing it in Ireland that's different from somewhere else. We can decide not to implement standards if we don't need them or if we don't use them. And we can help develop standards. So some standards are created in one location and then move into the global sphere. And we're inclusive and collaborative, so we don't, I suppose, work with one individual company or a cohort of companies. We make it open to everyone. So if a large retailer comes to us and say they want a standard, then we would invite all retailers into that discussion, and they would all have to agree to create that standard. We would not create a standard for one group of companies. So we serve mostly retail, of course, from our background. So we started off in retail, grocery in particular. So GS1 is everywhere in retail, so 99.99% of retail, including the online marketplaces, use GS1. You can't list on Amazon without a GS1 G10 or barcode number. And we're very big in healthcare, so all pharmaceuticals have GS1 barcodes, all medical devices, all implants, all people within the healthcare sector, so practitioners, doctors, nurses in Ireland and the UK and many other places around the world. And everyone here has a GS1 identifier, whether you know it or not. The individual health identifier, which is the unique number that's used within the healthcare system, is a GS1 standard. And then in construction, we're bringing all of those standards to bear on construction, and also our background across all of these sectors in manufacturing. So Geraldine was talking about earlier the manufacturing standards that we've adopted. And transport and logistics, of course, is a big part of that as well. So GS1 standards are ISO standards. Almost all of them are ISO standards or based on ISO standards. So GS1 work very closely with ISO. If you look at the ISO committees and the NSAI committees, there are GS1 people on those. I myself am on that BIM committee that Geraldine mentioned. So, and I'm also on an ISO committee now developing standards for tagging and barcoding industrial construction. So how do you put barcodes on wet concrete and steel, for instance? And then we work with Building Smart International. So Building Smart International, many of you will know, are the standards people for data dictionaries, for file transfers. So if you're exporting from a Revit model, you use the IFC standard, which is a Building Smart standard. What they recognized is that they don't have an identification standard, so they don't have a way of uniquely identifying products. for instance, or locations. So they looked for an international global ISO standard to use, and they came to us. And we've been working with them since to see how we could put that into practice. And as I mentioned, the RFID standard came from GS1. So there's at the end I'll mention another standard that we have that we're now trying to get ISO to adopt, and making good progress there. So just to underline that, these are all the GS1 standards that I'll be mentioning, and the ISO, the equivalent ISO standards for, you hear me talking about the GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number. That's the barcode number that you'll be familiar with. It's also called EAN or UPC code in some places. So that's the product identifier that we use, the GTIN, and that conforms to ISO standards. So the way to look at it is that GS1 standards are usually subsets of ISO standards. So we would take an ISO standard which might say that the global unique identifier needs to be 255 characters or fewer, and we would say, well, it needs to be 15 for us, or 14 or 13. So that makes it easier for people to plan on how to develop their databases, how to fit the barcode on a package, for instance, so you don't have to allow for 255. You know it's always going to be 15, and certain sizes, white space around it, all of those little things that take a long time to develop and perfect. So when you get GS1 standards, you get all that ecosystem. So you don't have to worry about, how do I put it into a barcode? Will it scan? How do I prove that my barcode is printed correctly and that my scanner is working correctly? All of those issues are taken off the table when you adopt GS1. So we talk about identifying, capturing, and sharing. So the identity part is the number. So you could have an identifier and never put it into a barcode. You could have a number that's for a room or something and never express it in a barcode. So the identifier is an independent entity of itself, and we use that within construction to identify companies. So it can be the organization, it can also be physical locations, so the company headquarters, all the sites, warehouses, and so on. Products I mentioned already, also assets, including maintainable assets, returnable assets. So and maintainable assets would be your air handling units, your pumps, and so on in buildings. And then logistics units, so a shipment. So what's in the shipment? How do I know when I scan that barcode on the shipment, all the constituent parts, the transfer of files, XML, and so on between them? And then master data. So the master data that goes with that, the digital product passports, the product data sheets based on product data templates and so on, and all the transaction data. So the order, the XML order, or APIs, or flat file orders, the order response, the delivery information, the event data then is the big part for traceability. So what happened, when did it happen, where did it happen, who was involved, what was the time, what was the location, using all those GS1 standards, so you have a way of tracing something through the supply chain. And then, of course, those can be expressed in barcodes. So 2D barcodes, we have the data matrix, which is the one shown there, which is similar to a QR code, but it's a more robust industrial standard. But also we work with QR codes, and there's a GS1 standard for QR codes, and then RFID tags. So two types of RFID tags, passive and active. So the active has a battery, so it's there broadcasting effectively, telling you where it is. Passive is sitting there waiting to be scanned. It gets energy from the scanner, so you can use that for kind of low value items or for shorter distances. The active one, you need to be aware that there's a battery in it, and the battery won't last forever, so your use case needs to take account of that. So those are just some of the themes again: identifying, capturing, share, different kinds of barcodes. So we have the linear barcodes. So there's the ENUPC, the first one there is the one you see on your can of beans in the supermarket. The GS1 128 is a larger barcode where you can incorporate batch, lot numbers, serial numbers, best before dates, and so on. And then when that got too small for what the industry needed, we started moving towards 2D. So you're going to see 2D in retail from 2027. So every product in retail will have a 2D barcode as well as the linear barcode for a transition period, and probably eventually a 2D barcode. And the reason for that is you can incorporate more information up to 3,000 or 4,000 characters, but you can put in things like the best before date, the sell by date, And in a supermarket, you could use that to say, well, it's got 2 more days on it, so I'm going to give a discount, or this is out of date, or this has been recalled, or whatever it might be, so don't sell it. Or this is alcohol, so don't sell it to children. So it enables a lot more. And then the 4 to focus on for construction really are the location number. So we're working with, for instance, Children's Health Ireland on the Children's Hospital, where all of the 6,000 rooms are going to have a GS1 GLN location number. And then beyond that, there are all the spaces. So we will put GLNs on the car parks, the risers between floors, the central areas and so on, so that you can always refer to a unique number. And within a hospital and with any building really, over time, if you're going to talk about 60 or 80 years, the names of rooms, the use of rooms are going to change. But having that unique identification in the background means you can always refer back to that and know exactly which room you're talking about, that it's the Tony O'Reilly ward or Sister Maria's ward or whatever. It's all the same GLN over time. And then the global trade item number for products, the global individual asset identifier for assets, and the GSRN is the one that's used for people. So within construction, you could think of operators, installers, have they been trained? So having a unique identification for them means that you can tag training, certification and so on to them. And then you can also, as part of the traceability, you can see who installed this, where did they install it, and so on. And then there's a structured way of putting those together, those numbers, check digits, how the prefix is used, what length they can be, and there are rules about how you put them into databases, how you put them into barcodes and so on. So, as I said, you get that whole ecosystem with GS1. And did I mention it's all free? Okay. So just to maybe highlight why we need that unique identification, this is a very complex slide, and it's deliberately complex because it's a very complex thing to try to understand. So within construction, you have clients, of course, you have regulators, and then you have designers, so architects, consultants, and so on. And they all work together at the start of the process. And then you have suppliers, manufacturers, subcontractors, and they're all using different systems, of course. So you've got your different systems for 3D models, you've got different ERP systems within the manufacturers and so on. And then you have environmental considerations. You have ISO certification. You have builders merchants. So builders merchants predominantly use GS1 standards because a lot of the products are off the shelf, so all the DIY products. And then the building operators, so FM systems and building management systems. Refurbishers come in at some stage, and then deconstruction. So what happens to the building at the end, what's in it. And in a few years' time, the EU are going to be saying, if you want to build a building here, you need to take the existing building, you need to use 70% of the products in the new building. So what are the products in that building? You need a way of identifying them. So the designers design, they use Excel. So the predominant software in construction, as you all know, is Excel, Microsoft Excel. Obviously, everybody uses their own thing, but when it comes to an interoperable, in quotes, solution, it's Microsoft Excel. And then you have calculations, so we'll hear about later on. And again, you have IFC files, you have classification systems. So the nearest thing that we have to identification and construction up to now is classification systems. So everybody's either using Uniclass or Omniclass or A-class. But a classification system only comes to a certain level, and you need more granularity. You can't say, these are all windows. You need something below that. You need to say this is an aluclad, this is wood, and so on. And what's in it, what's the embodied carbon, and so on, will become very important. So then you have the construction company trying to pull all of this together, and all of the same kind of issues. And eventually you get to the health and safety file, which is kind of the nirvana, I suppose, and trying to put all of this then onto thumb drives, into A4 binders, some of it in various kinds of digital format, but all of it unstructured, largely. Everyone's got their own terms and conditions. Alan asked the question about the digitalization of the ISO standards, and one of the things that will do is to bring all the the semantics together, so we're all talking about the same things across different parts of the industry. Data transfer is manual, so send me your Excel, send me your COBE file, send me your fax in some cases. They're all siloed systems, of course, terrible administration, increased cost, lack of visibility, and very wasteful and inefficient. Lots of time spent trying to pull all of this together. So every time you create the Excel file, you're creating a new Excel file because the old one is now out of date. And you need to start again doing all of your extract, transfer, and load and so on. So what we need is a global unique identifier, and must be interoperable and must be persistent. So you can create, within your business, you can create your own identifier. If you're, take a ludicrous example, you could put a number plate on your car, you could make it up and put it on your car, somebody will print it for you, and you'll drive down the road and you'll be fine until you get to the toll booth or the guard stop you, and then it's not interoperable. So it has to be unique, it has to be interoperable, and for construction it has to be persistent, so it has to be something that's going to be around in 60, 100 years' time. GS1 is 50 years old this year, by the way, just saying. So if you're looking in 60 years' time to build a new building on this site, you're going to need to know where the data is. Now, the EU are doing some work on that now and talking about distributed and central databases for digital product passport, construction product regulation, and so on. So likely some of that will be there, but for your products and for your data, for your building, you need somewhere to put the data, and that will become a bit of a challenge. But aside from that, you need to know that the data is structured in a way that can be read in 60 or 100 years' time. And the barcodes that we issued in the 1970s are still being used, so the bachelor's P's is the same barcode that we issued back in the day, so it still scans. Scans in Ireland, scans in China, scans in North Korea, to name some of our member organisation countries. And then it all ties into manufacturing. So talking about off-site, modular, that's all a manufacturing process. GS1 is preeminent in manufacturing. We know manufacturing 4.0 and so on. So just going back to the BIM world then. So BIM, we think of BIM as the 3D model, but it's also the structured data that goes with it, as well as the graphical data, and it's all the documentation. So how do you tie all of that together? Again, you need an interoperable identifier. And we would suggest the GTIN is the only suitable one. There are others that are emerging, but they are very confined either geographically, or they're very expensive because you have to buy into an ecosystem, and they're effectively proprietary. So you need something that's open and available, and that's going to be around. And then we're talking now about digital product passports. So the GS1 GTIN, if you look at the documentation that the EU have issued around the digital product passport, they mention all the ISO standards that you have to meet for your identifier, and GS1 ticks all of those boxes. Product data templates you'll hear about. This is the way of structuring product data for particular kinds of products, and from the template then you create a product data sheet, and that's the subset of master data that you exchange with your trading partners. So to create those and to tag them together and to know which is which, you need an identifier, and that's again where GS1 comes in. So in Norway, for instance, a company called CoBuilder, who are also operating in Ireland and Denmark and the UK, New Zealand, Czech Republic, they have adopted the GTIN as the unique identifier within their systems. And product data, PDT, Product Data Template Norway, who are the Norwegian state organisation, have done likewise. All right. So the Swedish sector got together and they looked at all the possible systems they could use for classification and for identification, and they came up with the GTIN as the one they would adopt, and they issued a mandate to the industry 2 years ago. And then earlier last year they issued an update saying that by the 1st of July 2022 everyone's going to have to use GTIN if you're working with the industry in Sweden. And similarly in Norway, the Norwegian Statsbygg, which is the organisation that purchases assets on behalf of the government, so all the schools, all the hospitals, all the roads, bridges and so on. If you want to deal with them, your product has to have a GTIN. Finguard Data Hub, so the regulated electricity industry in Finland, for all the metering points, they decided they needed a common way of identifying them so that all the companies who are operating in the market and across the Nordics could use the same systems, and they adopted the GTIN for that. So identification, I'll skip through these quickly because we're a little bit short on time. So the same identifier is the same GTIN, that's the number there in the middle, and the barcode that's used for a sauce gives you a global unique. So that number is only going to be used once for your product, so there's no chance that somebody else is going to use it anywhere else in the world. And it enables, as I said, master data, transactional data, and traceability. So that same number, but now in a 2D barcode, can do the same thing for a window, and it can be in an RFID tag as well as in standard one of the barcodes. And the same for something that you can't put a barcode on, but you can apply tags to. And as I said before, the identifier can be separate from the actual barcode, so you don't necessarily need a barcode. You just need in your systems to be recording it with a barcode number. Different kinds of tag materials, so you can incorporate in anything from a very cheap paper label that has an RFID, passive RFID tag embedded. You can print the QR code on top of it, you can print human readable. You can also put it on weatherproof plastic, RFID tags on metal, etched on metal, so direct part marking that's used in the for medical implants. So your hip joint has a 2D, if you have one, has a 2D data matrix, and that's unique to that particular item. So if there's a recall, you can figure out all the patients using the GSRN for patient ID, your IHI. You can see who are the patients, whereas in the past you had to recall the whole production because there was a problem with one or a small batch. So just going back to how standards are developed, I'm working with, on behalf of NSAI, representing NSAI on an ISO committee at the moment on 8506, which is to find a way of putting tags on industrial construction products. So concrete and steel are the two that are in scope at the moment. So how do you put a tag on wet concrete? Or parts that are made off-site, so precast or modular units like the steps there. Here's how, well, an example. So you can put a 2D data matrix with an embedded RFID tag. That might be just one of the ways. So that process is looking at what should the tag be, what materials should you use, how do you test that it's working in a quite complex test rigs that you need to set up and so on. So lastly, just the digital link. So this is the standard we're now working with the ISO committee on, making this an ISO standard. So digital link is a way, if you think of a QR code, it started as a marketing tool. So you scan the QR code, it brings you to a website. If you're lucky, that website's there. If you're luckier, it's there in 2 years' time. And that might tell you a little bit about the product, how good the product is. But with GS1 digital link, you get a menu of options. So that the embedded identifiers in the barcode will take you to different places depending on what you want to get. So in this case, it's giving me the O1. There is the GTIN in green. It's green on that as well. Yeah. In blue, then there's a serial number. So I want to see for that particular product with that particular serial number, I want the environmental product declaration document or XML file or whatever it might be, and that will take you to where that is currently. And these are dynamic links, so they can be changed over time. So if something moves, you can change it over time. And similarly for the digital product passport, or for CE mark, or product data template, or product data sheet, or for verified by GS1, which is our registry, which is the global registry of all GTINs. It will eventually contain all GTINs. Currently has a couple of 100 million. So you can always find on that registry who issued the GTIN. So even if you don't know where the environmental product declaration is, you will know who issued the GTIN, so who owns that product or who issued that product. And you can go to them and ask them, where's the information? My colleague Antonio is with me today and is going to be answering questions after. And those are my details if anyone wants to get in contact. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John.